Have you heard of Olivia, the travel company for lesbians and LGBTQ plus women? You know what they say. Wherever you go, there you are. And when you're a lesbian or LGBTQ plus woman, you want to go on vacation, let your hair down, and be your unique self. Olivia Travel creates full takeovers of their cruise, resort, riverboat, and adventure vacations. So you'll spend the week with LGBTQ plus women who come from all different backgrounds yet have so much in common. It's life-changing to be in the majority on your vacation. You don't know until you go. Discover Olivia for yourself at olivia.com or through the link in our show notes. Save $100 on your next Olivia booking with promo code CRUISING.
At Stonewall, there was karaoke, and I was singing Kanye West, and the person behind me, they were like, wow, I love this song.
This is Nikki Allen. On that fateful karaoke night at the Stonewall Inn, she was around 23 or 24.
And they're like, you're cool, and I'm cool, and I have a cool group of friends. And I'm like, okay, cool. And around that time, I was single, and I was looking for, because I grew up in Jersey City, so obviously right across the river, or the ocean? The river. And so it's not that I didn't have like a queer circle, but I was definitely looking for a community at that point.
At the same time, also in New York, Justine LaViolette was on their own quest for queer community, or maybe something more.
There was this app for a while called Datch. I think it's her now, and it was like sold as the like queer person grinder. It wasn't really that, yeah. But I went on one, I guess, date.
Yeah, it was a date.
I went on a date, and it was kind of like an immediate no. Like we both were like, ooh, this isn't the vibe, but we're like, okay, well, but we like to be friends. And so the girl was like, do you want to come to the woods?
Any Brooklyn lesbians or longtime cruising listeners will know about Wednesdays at the Woods. But for those of you who don't, the Woods is a bar in Williamsburg. Every Wednesday, they host a very popular party for the lesbians, sapphics, dykes, queer women, and non-binary folks of Brooklyn.
She was like, I'm going to meet up with my friends. Do you want to come with me? And I was like, why not?
Friends,
and one of the friends was Nikki.
See, Justine's new friend from Datch was also Nikki's relatively new friend from Stonewall Karaoke. Justine and Nikki hit it off immediately.
Then we were just friends.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even feel like our friendship grew. It was just like one of those things where it's just like, we are friends now. Like, it was just kind of immediate.
Yeah.
So we had this like little clique of lesbians. Big clique, I guess, of lesbians that we run around with in our 20s.
But even more importantly, they had found each other.
They're just like one of the best people I know.
You're one of the best people I know. I love you so much.
They're also really silly. I would say Justine is so funny. Like, we riff-raff.
And that's true. We laugh a lot. We laugh a lot. And I think also during, like, the stressful, hard times, like, being able to, like, make jokes and be, like, have a certain sense of dark humor has been, like, invaluable. Is that the right word? Yeah, invaluable.
Yeah.
You know?
This is Cruising, a podcast about the last lesbian bars in the U.S. My name is Sarah Gabrielli, and this season we're taking you to lesbian bars past and present. This is The Bush.
Well, I think it started a long time ago. Yeah. We were in our like mid-20s, I would say.
Today, Nikki and Justine are the owners of Brooklyn's newest dyke bar, The Bush. That night they met at the Woods was about a decade ago, and the two have pretty much been best friends ever since.
I feel like we did a lot of silly things in our 20s.
Yeah.
Like we would go out and come home at like 5 a.m. and then I would get dressed and go back to work.
Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah.
Really unhinged behavior.
Yeah.
So I guess that speaks to a little bit about what we were like at that age.
Yes.
We were always like, I don't know, dating around, going out.
Well, I was a serial monogamist.
Right.
Still am.
Okay. I was dating around, going out. No. Yeah. And I don't know, I feel like we kind of like moved as a pack, you know, like we did a lot of stuff together. Like
we did, yes.
So lots of just like hanging out, activities, brunches.
And of course, cruising New York City's handful of lesbian bars. Cubbyhole, Henrietta's, and Ginger's.
All the time.
All the time, yeah. We would go to these places and we love them. We love them so much. Well, and it's really nice to like walk into a space and know you have a certain amount of shorthand with everybody.
Right.
There's an ease to it. No one's going to like ask you something weird.
There's a respect.
There's a respect.
Yeah.
Somewhere in their transition from early to mid-20s, Nikki and Justine went from seeking out queer spaces and communities to wanting to create their own. The existing dyke bars and parties weren't quite meeting all of their needs.
We were just getting to an age. At the time, none of the like lesbian bars here had a cocktail program offering, so we were kind of gravitating towards that.
They also didn't have like a place to sit,
right?
Or even like a big enough dance floor.
We felt like we were going to a lot of parties that were in gay spaces made for gay men or straight spaces, and we wanted to have our own space that could host like the volume, you know?
I remember one time Justine was already toying with the idea because we were talking about it at a party one time. One time I was going through this really rough breakup and like crying at Nowadays maybe, and you were like, let's do this together. And I'm like, elsewhere. And you're like, let's just do this. And I'm like crying and I'm like, yeah.
And also, like, at the time, when we were first starting to talk about it, there was a lot of art happening that was, like, memorializing lesbian bars. Like, The Shakedown. It was, like, I think that was, like, 2016, 2017. The Shakedown came out.
The documentary Shakedown actually came out in 2018.
Check this out. I don't mean to appall anybody, but this is a gay club. Please don't disrespect my dancers. They dance for girls. If you don't like it, just have a seat, boo-boo, okay?
It chronicles LA's roving black lesbian strip club of the same name through its closure in 2004.
All of these things were kind of like talking about these spaces as though they were things of the past. There's that art installation in Bushwick called Eulogy for a Dyke Bar.
Yes.
Artist Macon Reed first created their project Eulogy for a Dyke Bar back in 2015.
It was like at this art residency that I was doing in Bushwick in a little like DIY artist-run space. So basically what I did was I built a functioning dyke bar into that space.
This is Macon Reed.
And I'm pronoun confused, but currently working with they, them. And I'm an artist who works in all sorts of things, but primarily like big sculptural installations that have some kind of like public programming event inside of them. And Eulogy for the Dyke Bar is a project I've been working on for 9 years about the disappearance of dyke bars. And not just that, but all of the like conversations and stereotypes and assumptions around why they weren't thriving, you know?
Over the past 9 years, they've produced 8 different versions of this installation around the world. The Bushwick one that Nikki and Justine mentioned was the first. Back in 2015, the project was partly born out of Macon's own personal frustrations.
I couldn't find a queer space that felt like it centered me and the people that I wanted to make out with. And so I, was really frustrated and I felt lonely, and I started kind of talking to people about why that was the case. And I just found like so many stereotypes and things that I was, wasn't sure sounded true. And, ideas that like dykey and dyke adjacent people, like don't like to cruise or have sex as much and just want to like hang out at home and drink tea with their cats, which I'm like, there's nothing wrong with hanging out at home and drinking tea with your cats. But I was like, is that really true? And so I started leaning into it more and interviewing like, especially queer elders about it, but just learning about all the sort of socioeconomic factors that like specifically white cis gay men don't experience in the same way that all other queer people do. And like all of the history around that and how it's affected the development of those spaces even existing in the first place. It's like when you don't have as much money to go out, you're less likely to party, but also you're less likely to have resources to keep it open if you're running a bar. So it was interesting to me just how much of it had to do with that. But then there's so many layers you go back in history, like a lot of places in the US, women weren't allowed to even order a drink by themselves for many years. They had to have a man with them to get a drink. And we forget that, women weren't allowed to have credit cards until the 1970s. So there's all of this stuff that is actually about money, but yet queers kind of self-gaslight and say, oh, it's just because we don't like to have the things that cis gay men and straight people have as much, which is just not true. One of the sort of interesting just blips that I found at one point was just about how for a long time femmes were the main, I'm just going to use the language of the time, like butches and femmes back in the day, how femmes were the main breadwinners because they were able to actually get jobs, whereas, butches were like either barely employed or not able to get work. And women were paid so much less for their salaries in general, because it was assumed that if a woman was working, it was supplementary to a husband. So you have these queer people who are living off of money that's supposed to be supplemental to another income, and also two people or more living off of that income. So there was this way where it was just interesting to reframe it and go, oh yeah. And of course it's, we're ending up in this situation where there are going to be less bars.
So armed with all of this information, in September of 2015, Macon created a dyke bar of their own at a Bushwick space called Wayfarers Gallery.
So everything was made out of paper mache and cardboard. The walls, I actually used like this crazy tool to hand paint wood paneling on. So there's a really handsy quality. Like I like everything to look like, what it's representing from the real world, but it's like a little bit lumpy. I had a pool table kind of center in the space that I made out of cardboard and paper mache. And behind that was a bar with lots of brightly colored bottles and things. And then to the right was the wall where all the archival images were printed. And I loved that too. I printed them all black and white, even if they were from now versus the 30s, because I really wanted people to kind of have to figure out where they were in history when they were looking at all of them. And there were things like letters from bar owners from the 80s about why they were closing, next to Facebook posts from the owner of the Lex, so that people could see like these similarities for why the spaces were closing.
Over the years, each iteration of Eulogy for a Dyke Bar has looked different, with one thing in common.
So every single one has had a neon sign in big letters that says Dyke Bar. And in the original one in Bushwick, those were hanging in the windows, and it was kind of perfect because I think it was some kind of old shop space. So it really looked kind of dive bar-like when you walked up. And I really loved that people saw the words Dyke Bar walking by. So even if they weren't queer or weren't coming to the project or whatever, it was just sort of injecting the idea of a dyke bar into the world.
During the day, people could come by and experience the installation as relatively quiet and empty, a relic of the past.
The idea was that they could sit with the idea of what it would feel like if these spaces were totally extinct, because it felt close at the time, and then we would activate it at night.
In the evening, it would have been hard to tell the difference between the installation and an actual dyke bar. They brought in a DJ and sold beer and wine, except most actual dyke bars aren't overflowing with customers, especially back in 2015.
It was so wild because I'd felt so lonely with the need for those spaces. And then suddenly we put out the event, and this space that normally maybe had 40 people show up had 1,000 people RSVP. And I didn't know what to do because I'd never had that kind of attention for a project before. It really is like a rare moment that an artist gets to hit on a note that their community really needs. And so it was crazy. And so then I was suddenly figuring out how to live stream it into another queer event space somewhere else so people could go. And then friends in Tennessee were watching it online. It just became this thing that was wild. And we literally had a line around the block for 2 hours for people to get into the space. And we did the show 2 times.
The show was a storytelling event they'd organized with a group called Queer Memoir. It ran 2 out of the 4 nights the Dyke Bar was open.
A number of people basically came and told stories about what dyke bars had meant to them. And basically, everybody was just really packed in like sardines. And then once the storytelling part kicked in, we stopped serving drinks and everyone was sitting on the floor, side by side, huddled together. And I have these great pictures of people gasping while they're hearing these stories.
Like so many dykes before them, Macon had to get creative when it came to funding all of this.
I had no money. The little money I had to do the project came from getting in a crazy car accident in Memphis with an uninsured driver. I just throw that out there because I'm like, dyke artists, you know, there's just that socioeconomic factor plays in at every level. I was sitting at a stoplight and looked up, and suddenly 2 cars were flying at me, and then it threw us into the car behind us. And, you know, the windshield broke and the airbag went on. It was just a wild thing. And so I ended up in the hospital, and eventually, long story long, I got about $8,000 from that. And I, instead of getting my neck fixed, which I should have done, I did the Dyke Bar project and helped myself float. So that's really like, that was what kind of gave me the lift. And the number of queer artists that I know who do have careers at this point in the arts and started with getting hit by a truck or some kind of accident is wild. I would love us to have better art grants than that, but it's consistent.
To this day, Macon has a bulging disc in their neck, but they don't regret the way they spent that money.
It's a questionable choice, but I also feel like that was really one of the most meaningful, life-changing experiences I had. Part of the project is like being in the bar and just like having people come up and share their feelings about not having these spaces or gender confusion or whatever. And I hold a lot, like people cry, people have feelings. And there were like, you know, really younger queers crying because they hadn't like just were so moved by the queer elders talking about what dyke bars were for them in the 70s, you know? So it was just a really powerful experience and the kind of thing where it was way more needed than I even knew. Like, yeah, my neck has troubles, but it feels like it's been a really meaningful project. So I stand by my choice.
Amongst those younger queers, incredibly moved by the installation, were Justine and Nikki.
So like around that time, we were like, wait, we don't want it to be a thing of the past. Like, what the hell?
Yet another reason to create a dyke bar of their own.
And I feel like it's kind of started as a joke. Like, it was kind of like a joke that got out of control. Like, at the first iteration, we're like, well, I guess if we want these things, we're just going to have to do them ourselves. Like, but like joking about it. And then, things kind of spiraled out of control. And now we're sitting in a bar doing a podcast.
That we own. Looking back, I would not do it again. No.
Nikki is mostly joking here, but there is some truth in the fact that this has been a long and challenging journey that neither of them was fully prepared for.
Why not?
Mm-hmm.
Why not us? Turns out lots of reasons.
Our sanity.
Also turns out a lot. But turns out it's really hard to open a bar in New York, full stop.
They officially started the process back in 2016.
Looking for a space was really challenging because landlords don't necessarily want to rent to somebody that's never done the thing that's going on in the space. Also,
or queer people.
Yeah. We were shocked by how conservative a lot. I don't know why I was shocked. But I was shocked by how conservative a lot of the landlords in New York are. Who'd have guessed?
Justine and Nikki recalled one potential landlord in particular who seemed to demonstrate some blatant homophobia towards them.
He was really Christian and worried about us being too political, and we're like, well, what do you mean by that? Like, he's like, I don't want you to put stuff in the windows, and we're like, well, what do you mean by that? Because we hadn't even really told him anything about the project, and so I'm like, is being gay political to you? Is being what are you saying to me right now? Like, what about us and what we've presented to you, which is a concept, a pitch deck for a cocktail bar, makes you feel like you need to put something in our lease about us being political.
It was so specific too because it said something about rallies and election and things like that.
Which was a pretty big red flag.
Yeah.
In early 2020, Nikki and Justine thought they had finally found their bar.
We were in lease negotiations for space around the corner, but it was March 2020 when we decided to pull out of the negotiations because we were like, I don't know what's going to happen. And I'm very glad we did because we would have been screwed.
Yeah.
And we just simply we didn't really have any runway when we opened this. We opened this bar on credit cards and a little bit of hope and gumption. And so we would have shot our shot too early, essentially. We would have, it wouldn't have gone off the ground if we had to close for COVID.
And that space is still empty.
Yeah, I know.
Which is so crazy.
They were specifically looking at spaces in Bushwick, a Brooklyn neighborhood teeming with art, music, and nightlife. In part, their search was focused on Bushwick because they already had their dynamite name.
The name came during that time period before the bar was even like anything close to real.
Yeah.
And it was because, like queer bars have this like long history of like naughty names, but they're always something like the Pink Pussycat or like the Ramrod. I think the Ramrod's actually a real bar. I swear to God. So we wanted something that reflects like what does it mean to be a dyke bar in 2024, and it's something way more inclusive. Like
most people can have a Bush,
and so we liked that because it's like naughty. It's
And then we were like, we should really get this in Bushwick.
Yeah, and then we're like, well, now we have to open in
like,
Bushwick.
Everything just happened so, like...
the way it was meant to.
Yeah. Because here we are in the heart of Bushwick.
I know. Mm-hmm. A lot of our vendors are like old guys, and so like that's kind of fun. They never say anything though. Everyone's always very discreet. They just like sometimes they'll turn red and just be like, oh. Like, you can, like, see them clock it and then be like, oh. And then, We also, coincidentally, love pubic hair. Yeah. So, it just all fell into place.
Free advertising for pubic hair.
Yeah, exactly.
The Bush finally found a home in Bushwick on the corner of Troutman and Irving. It's a deep space with a dance floor in the back past the bar and a craft cocktail menu just like they'd always imagined. After much renovating, the Bush finally opened in April of 2023.
It truly didn't become real for me until people started walking in here.
I guess
I'm
that's
like, this
true.
is so silly.
Yeah, I guess that's so true. That's so true. Because also, we were driving here on opening day, like in our cute little outfits, being like...
I had on heels.
I'm so sorry. Being like, oh, we didn't have any bar backs because we didn't think we were going to be busy. And so we like... got here being like, okay, we're gonna just sit in the corner, this seat where we are right now actually, and sit and get our drinks and watch and wait and hope somebody comes in, see if anyone comes in. And then we pulled up and there was already like a line forming and we were like, oh no. We ended up bar backing all night in our like cute little outfits, which was crazy. And amazing, yeah. It was very exciting. It made it very real, very quick. Yeah.
Have you heard of Olivia, the travel company for lesbians and LGBTQ plus women? You know what they say. Those who wish to sing always find a song. And when you're a lesbian or LGBTQ plus woman, you want to be able to go on vacation, have some laughs, and be your unique self. Olivia Travel creates full takeovers of their cruise, resort, riverboat, and adventure vacations. And they program every trip with comedians and musicians from our community. You'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll have the time of your life. Discover Olivia for yourself at olivia.com or through the link in our show notes and save $100 on your next Olivia booking when you use promo code CRUISING.
We went to their grand opening for family and friends, which
I
was
was
very
literally
nice.
their first customer. I gave them the first
Sarah
dollar.
Was the first
I was really
dollar.
into the idea of giving them their first dollar.
That was Loretta Chung and Sarah Hollenquist. They're regular customers at the Bush, as well as the owners of a beer company you might have heard of called Dyke Beer.
And I was like, you gotta frame it. It's like really important to a business. And I found like a crisp dollar, like a really good one.
Sarah was one of the first people to come to the bar. She was one of the first people here.
I do remember that. Yes, I do remember that.
But yeah, we love the Dyke Beer crew, and they've been supportive from like before we opened, and it's just like amazing. Like they've been great.
Dyke Beer is a craft beer label that makes a point of celebrating and promoting queer spaces. Their beers, which include the original Dyke Beer Saison, the Out Stout, and the Tall Girl Goza, can be found at queer bars throughout New York City and beyond, including the Bush.
Well, they reached out to us because they really love Dyke Beer, and we were like, where did Justine and Nikki come from? They just popped out of nowhere. And that's how we got introduced to them.
Today, Dyke Beer also runs a monthly Bingo at the Bush event.
It's interesting to be a product within the Bush as well as someone working as an event planner in the Bush, and then also someone who just generally enjoys it.
Loretta and Sarah are both grassroots activists, and they bring that background into their vision for Dyke Beer. At first glance, Dyke Beer's brightly colored collage art style cans are pure fun. They feature adorable gay animals.
So we put the dogs and cats in what we would consider dyke clothes or queer clothes as well. So like they have their own anamorph thing going on. Also, it tends to be what we would consider dyke activities. That there's a lot of pool tables and bars. So the dog and cat playing pool. Our tall girl can, all the animals are in drag and at a disco, and there's a disco ball and a disco floor. So they're all kind of like homages to queer culture in a way.
Upon closer examination, the cans are also queer billboards of sorts.
We put Maite, which is a queer-owned business in Bushwick. We put their logo on it as just a thank you because they're one of our first customers, along with Good Judy, who we put on the Tall Girl Goes a Can.
Somebody once told us, the name is so aggressive, but then the can is so cute. I can't calculate it in my brain how adorable the colors and the animals doing things are. And so I think it has done something unique. The beer can almost is so bright, and with the name Dyke Beer, I think a lot of allies are curious about it even. And so we've had, like a lot of straight people that are now interested in the fact that, wow, you only have so many dyke bars in the US. I had no idea. And so there's kind of this like campaign on a can really with Dyke Beer that has really helped us in the city, not only like get followers or recognition or anything like that, but I think overall getting people to understand that this is a serious issue of a lack of space.
It makes sense that a name like Dyke Beer would turn some heads, not unlike naming a lesbian bar The Bush. But for a lot of queer folks, the term dyke doesn't feel as aggressive as it might sound. It's found its way into the slogans of a lot of newer lesbian bars, and that's part of why we've started using it so much on the podcast.
We're trying to reclaim the word dyke like the word queer was reclaimed. Right now, dyke still sounds harsh, and I understand that especially queer women in their 50s have heard that word slurred at them in an upsetting way and maybe don't want to use it. But I find that a lot of Gen Z really enjoys the term and identifying with the term dyke. I consider it just an umbrella term that you're not so focused on the patriarchy and gay cisgender men, that there's a lot of folks who fall underneath the term dyke. I feel like dyke is almost just this little umbrella term underneath queer, and we're just trying to get that out there too, and the acceptance of that.
Macon Reed also prefers the word dyke. It's obviously been pretty central to their installation.
For me, dyke is almost even less attached to a specific gender or sexuality than like an ethos of like mutual aid and like fuck you to fucked up systems and things like that. So dyke just felt like the most open version of what I was trying to say. Basically, if you've ever or think you might ever identify with dykeness or dyke culture. And now I use the term dyke adjacent a lot.
For Sarah and Loretta, the name Dyke Beer is also a nod to the Dyke March.
The way we came up with the name really is really because of the Dyke March existing and being such an important part of our lives and us growing up. Having the name Dyke Beer is paying an homage to, our elders that came before us who paved the way, and also just being seen and visibility.
In the early 90s, people across the U.S. began organizing Dyke marches in cities like New York, Washington, D.C., and San Francisco. They were born out of a need for lesbian visibility and a desire to center protest and activism during Pride. Today, Dyke marches around the world offer an alternative to more corporate Pride marches and parades.
When I was in high school and trying to figure out just seeing that visibility in the city, I grew up near San Francisco, was like a lot and eye-opening to me. I remember, I think when I did turn 17, two of my friends said, "Do you want to go to the Dyke March?" And I was like, "What is that?" And I was terrified, because I went and there's all these cool, gorgeous looking women. And a lot of them were wearing Doc Martens at the time. And I thought it was the best thing ever, but I was scared, So I saw it, I waved, I did a little walk around the, years after that, I would just keep going. And that's where I felt the most at home and the most seen and I could just be myself and not, be a freak.
Even as a teenager, the word dyke resonated with Loretta.
At the time, it was like this aggressive and assertive thing, just being like, hey, I'm here, don't f with me. I'm a dyke. It was just like taking ownership of like who I was as a queer person.
I would say there is like an element of rebellion in the word dyke.
There definitely is.
Almost feels like lesbian is the proper word or bisexual is the proper word. I feel like, I don't know, there's always been this feeling of protest, and like every year at the Dyke March, they always make sure to tell you it's a protest, not a parade, and that there's always like a theme that feels really rebellious. I think this year's theme is Palestine. Maybe the abortion, Roe versus Wade, I think last year. So it's always a very like kind of serious feminist topic always with them too.
The New York City Dyke March actually played an important role in Dyke Beer's inception, beyond just inspiring the name. It all started when Loretta moved to New York in 2015.
Well, when I moved here, I didn't know anyone, so I wanted to get involved with some groups just to meet people and build community.
Loretta ended up joining the Dyke March committee, and that's where them and a few others from the Dyke March came up with an idea for a pop-up party called Dyke Bar Takeover.
We would take over a non-queer bar and we would hire local performers, artists, and charge a cover at the door, pay the performers and artists, and then whatever was left over, we would just donate to a local nonprofit. It's not something that we could have really done with Dyke March because they have certain sets of events. So we just decided to do this separately.
And through Dyke Bar Takeover, Loretta met Sarah.
Loretta was tending to DJ the Dyke Bar Takeover events, and I was always the door dyke. I love seeing who's going in the door and just talking to everybody and just being very extroverted. And I think we both had the same, moral compass, and that we wanted to support dyke spaces and that we wanted to keep this work and helping the queer community in New York.
And when the pandemic hit, we couldn't do events. So we were trying to rack our brains on like, what kind of event can we have? And, we came up with Dyke Beer, and also Sarah loves home brewing a lot. And I would come over before pandemic to do that. And I think that's where it came from.
Of the two, Sarah's really the beer expert. What they share is a passion for queer nightlife.
I think we both enjoyed Dyke Bar Takeover so much. And then when we were really quarantined, it was a question of reflection and then how can we make Dyke Bar Takeover our jobs? And so we decided to create Dyke Beer as a business, almost like a grassroots company. This has been two people without business degrees who had no industry experience in beer or owning a business at all.
By January of 2021, Dyke Beer had their first batch of beer.
We had a launch party at Wiley's Brewery in Gowanus.
Who made our first batch.
Right, who made our first batch. And because of COVID, their tanks weren't full making beer, so they had a free tank. So we made a very small batch of 15 barrels, which is roughly about 180 cases. And there's 24 cans in a case. And so there was seating outside, benches. And surprisingly, the community showed up.
It was freezing. This is January in New York City. It was a freezing cold, I believe even snowy day. It was insane.
I think we ended up selling about 20 cases, which was amazing because at the beginning I was like, how are we going to sell 3,000 cans of beer in the middle of COVID? So it was very grassroots. It was just me and Sarah pitching bars, walking to different bars, seeing if they wanted the beer, if they wanted a sample. At the time, a lot of bars were not buying beer because of COVID. So it was very difficult, but we just kept going because we both have full-time day jobs.
As do the Bush owners, Justine and Nikki. All four entrepreneurs spend their weekdays in some form of corporate America. Loretta as a budget project manager and Sarah as an executive assistant. And as you can imagine, they're basically always working.
We tell our clients we're always available. Like they can call us at any time. We drop off samples ourselves. We're the salespeople. We are the designers. We are the recipe creators. normally when you have a brewery, you have like a large operation that you do have like 50 people, but Loretta and I are just doing everything under the sun, really. And I think that's what a lot of people don't realize about the company. They're like, oh, I see you're like right next to Stella, so you must be like them. And it's like, oh, no, hon, it's not yet. Not that level. Not yet is a good idea.
Not yet, but
okay.
we will get there. But I think we people do think that we're bigger than we are. I get resumes, we get resumes sent to us like all the time.
We're still startups.
We're still a startup. It's just me and Sarah.
Currently, Dyke Beer is available in bars and stores throughout New York, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. And you can also have Dyke Beer shipped to your home in 45 states.
We see as a future endeavor to definitely be in other states. It just requires more Dyke power, more money. We're working on getting investors and figuring something out just right now to have our own tap room.
Yeah, that's big for us. We want to have like the first brewery that's completely Dyke Queer centered. And so that would be really fun for us to be able to have a QCAT tap room concept and probably an event space in the back.
Despite being such a small company, Dyke Beer feels like a household name in just about any queer bar in New York City.
I've never gotten over seeing somebody I don't know ordering one in the wild. Like, it's insane for me.
You must see it all the time, because I see it all the time.
I love it. When I see someone carrying a can of Dyke Beer, I just want to like hug you. But I don't do that because I would just be creepy and be like, hi. And like sometimes people are drunk or they're like busy on a date. Like, I'm not going to interrupt that. But I get so excited. I think we both do. And it feels like our hearts like so much. Like, I'm just like, all of our hard work, all of the things we do like on the back end, which no one sees, like it's totally worth it.
This happens a lot at The Bush because between hosting events and just being a friend and customer, Loretta spends a fair amount of time there.
We went on the family and friends night, and then I was there every day for the following week. I was just like, well, this is my second home. You're just going to see me around often when I can just have a chance to stop by, for a bit and then leave. So it's been really nice, and it's been a nice relationship with both of them at The Bush.
I know anytime I see Loretta, I just get like bright-eyed because I love them so much. They're like one of our biggest supporters.
Oh yeah, Loretta's amazing.
Yeah. Just because we work together doesn't mean that you have to show up here, but like they show up, they have fun.
Like come to events that aren't their events, like that sort of thing, which I don't know, like they seem to really care about like community in general.
Absolutely.
Which is really special.
The community in general is really what's kept Justine and Nikki going through the many challenges of running a bar.
I can't imagine doing this without a built-in community.
I agree.
The community has kind of affected like every element. Like the bench we're sitting on was made by Julia Morrow, a very loved community member. Like we poured the enamel on the bar, like all of our friends painted. And then it also goes into like when we opened, there was a really big reception. And I feel like without the built-in community, like you wouldn't necessarily get that. And I think that's really special. And frankly, it just wouldn't have been a sustainable project if we didn't have that community.
And even if they didn't help with like physically doing things, they helped with getting the word out, and it's like that all matters and counts, and we're so appreciative because essentially like what's going to keep us going is community and that word of mouth.
To start our Bush Instagram, we just posted it from our personal Instagram accounts, and then somehow by the time we opened, there was like a line out the door. So it's like the community really does a good job of rallying.
I remember on opening night, or a couple days after, a friend of mine texted, like, I had a friend that said they waited online 90 minutes, but it was all worth it. Like, yeah.
I love that.
Cruising is independently reported and produced by a small but mighty team of 3. Story producer and social media manager Rachel Karp, line producer and resident road trip driver Jen McGinnity, and story producer and audio engineer me, Sarah Gabrielli. Our theme song is by Joey Freeman. This episode was sponsored by Olivia Travel. You can find us at our website, cruisingpod.com, on social media @cruisingpod, or support us at buymeacoffee.com/cruisingpod. Listen to Cruising wherever you get your podcasts.